Welcome to the Topic of the Month with Kim Wardlow, an AINC original podcast. It's not easy being blind or going through vision loss, but we'll help you navigate these waters. Press on. Push forward. You've got this.
Thank you for joining us again for the Topic of the Month podcast. We are still on the topic of mental health, and we have Bill Lundgren joining us again this week for our topic, which will be on grief. Initially talking about kind of the basics of mental health, how you find a counselor. We moved into talking about addiction. And last week, we were talking about trauma and abuse. So we'll finish off the month with the topic of grief, something that we all have to deal with at some point in our lives and for various reasons. Bill, just a really basic question. What is grief?
Well, it's easier to talk about grief in relation to depression because they get mixed up. But grief is a response to a traumatic event, to a loss, is a feeling of sadness. And that's where I distinguish that from depression. But grief that is unresolved may lead to depression. But depression is a totally different thing in the sense that it's if you look at the criteria for depression, there are a whole bunch of criteria that have to be met before someone can label it depression. But grief would be unresolved grief can be one of it. But the grief is, and the important word is sadness. Someone I love dies. I've suffered a loss. My pet dog, when I lost my canine companion in the middle of the pandemic, that was terrible because I was so dependent on my guide dog, and I couldn't really move around as freely, and it took a while because of the pandemic to get a replacement dog. So, but I know what grief is, and I know that I just have to accept it. Yes, it's real sad. There's nothing I can do about it, but I have a right to feel sad about this loss. And I also have to figure out what it is that I can do. When we talk about the death of someone, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross years ago came out with a kind of understanding of the stages of loss, of grief and loss. She starts off with denial, starts off with bargaining, that is, trying to make some adjustment. Then it may turn into anger. It can turn into depression before you come to acceptance. And that depression is a little different from because it has a situational cause rather than the organic depression or something that we can't quite put our finger on when it started and when it stopped. But with grief, we have the loss. And the stages I mentioned, some people think of those as linear. No, they're not. We may move back and forth between these stages till we come to the part of accepting the loss of that person or that thing. And since she came up with that, there's been another specialist, David Kessler, a psychiatrist, who asked the family of Kubler-Ross if he could add a sixth stage, which again is not 1, 2, 3, 4, but may move back and forth. And I think it's an important thing for us to consider, finding meaning. And when I heard that being as another stage, I thought, right on. And this is where it's particularly, let's face it, if you lost your sight later in life, that is a loss. If you never had it, it's we're dealing with the shame, I'll call it, of being different from everyone else, and that can cause a grief reaction. If you had, I had retinitis pigmentosa, never knew that I was losing my eyesight. It's just I knew driving was a little more difficult, but I thought everybody saw the way I did. But then when I got the diagnosis, and it became real, and I thought, well, what am I going to do with my life? And that is what everybody goes through in this grief reaction. Now that I've lost this person or my eyesight or some physical ability or getting older with grief, as we get older, we grieve when we can't do the things we used to be able to do. I joke about it. That's how I personally deal with some grief. The fact that when I get up in the morning, I have to throw myself to the dresser to stand upright in order to walk, to the bathroom hand over hand, because, when you're older and you get out of bed, everything creaks. But the point is that these are all losses, and the degree of loss is what determines how difficult it is for us to, as people ask us to do, to get over it. Mm-hmm. And this is where the problem is. People tell us to get over it, and we can't. I had trouble getting over the loss of my guide dog, and I knew it was going to be hard to get over it until I had a replacement dog that would help me again to be able to do the things I used to be able to do with a dog companion. And also the grief was less because there were a whole slew of people around me. They didn't want to put a harness and a choke collar on, but they were willing to guide me around. So it made it easier. Mm-hmm. But if you have a grief, a family member or whatever, it's important, I think, to accept that there is a mourning process. One of the things that I find very interesting about those in the Jewish community, there's a ceremony, and I can't remember the name of it, but a year after the death of a person, the gravestone is unveiled. Mm. And my friends who are Jewish who've attended that said it's more powerful than, when you're dealing with the shock or the loss of the person. Right. It's final. But it also brings closure. And with grief, one of the things we have to look at is how do we bring closure on this feeling that we have and be able to move on. Mm-hmm. And part of it is to accept that it's okay for us to be grieving. That's why ceremonies like wearing a black mantilla or doing the involvement as they do in Mexico with the Dance of the Dead, the ceremony of reminding every year at All Saints Day, remembering those who have died. That's a way of helping to bring closure and know that we're okay. And even the idea that the person's spirit is still around is a way of helping us to bring closure. That's why funerals are helpful. Because if we bring closure. But to tell somebody, get over it, that's not going to cut it. Because the person who's caught in the grief reaction says, how do I do that? If I could, I would do it.
Right.
And again, a counselor, I had one of those experiences that reminds me to be humble. My sister died last November, and in the next 2 weeks, 3 people came in to see me about grief and loss. And I said to myself, no, I don't think I'm going to do this. I did work with them, but in many ways I was working through my own grief and loss, right. In a way, as I was helping them deal with grief and loss. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it is being able to talk about it, to own it, to accept, and to also understand that there are parts of that person that you've lost that remain with you. Even when we talk about animal communicators say, if your pet remains with you and they do a walk-in, when you get the next one, they'll walk in, and that spirit of that beloved animal is there with you in the body of the new cat or dog. And that's helpful for people to think in those terms. Is it true? Hey, if it helps with the grief, go for it. And
well, I'm really hearing that grief is a process, and it can vary between people, and depending what you're grieving, there may be some ongoing grief. For example, with vision loss, if it's not lost in a sudden way, if it happens over time, and there's a few things you can't do, and now there's a few more things that grief process, you may have to go through that cycle multiple times, and you may have to work through finding new meaning and doing things you like to do in a different way, or learning to do something new. If for some reason you really aren't able to do a favorite hobby or something any longer, that really can take a process and a while to accomplish.
Well, and that's the advantage of going to a counselor. See, we think, we have to have some mental illness to go to a counselor. No, when we're stuck, when we're emotionally stuck, that's when a counselor can help us get out of that stuckness that we're in, and it's something that family members can't do. They're too close to it. They don't have the understanding, and they're grieving too, but they don't want to hear other people's grief. So the counselor, as an objective outsider, and again, it's a therapy form that therapists can advertise that they work in grief and loss, and to help people to go through those kinds of things. And again, there's nothing to be ashamed of if you're feeling the grief of losing your eyesight. It's particularly acute for the person who may lose it suddenly. But I've said to people that I've gone through the stages of grief and loss for a long time, because it keeps recycling. I lose more and more sight and more, and I have to adjust my life to it. I'm having to deal with loss, and that's the reality, and that is not something to be ashamed of. And men have more trouble with grief and loss, I think, than women do, because women are allowed to grieve, to be mourners. But men, oh no, we've got to be like John Wayne, riding off into the sunset with 3 bullets in our side and pretend nothing has happened, which is a disaster for us males. And we're getting better at recognizing that, but we still get caught up in that kind of macho thing that's harming us, really.
Right. Do you have suggestions for a person who's going through grief, and certainly a counselor, an individual counselor could help a person with this, but that conflict of you're grieving, but life does go on. Maybe you're still working, you still have to go to work, or you're grieving because your spouse died, but you still have to attend to the funeral arrangements or deal with family or other people, and how to balance that sense of grief with really the practicality of needing to continue on with life.
And that drinking doesn't do it. I tell everybody, drinking does not deal with the grief. In fact, it blocks your ability to grieve. Some of the activities, like you say, is really very helpful, because we can put the grief aside and do whatever is needed to be done, and then come back to the grief. One of the things that I often recommend to clients is, particularly if it has to do with a person, to write a letter to that person and just when grief is within us, it tends to be circular, it doesn't go anywhere. But sometimes when we put something in writing, or we do a recording and talk to that person who's gone, and then it helps to make it linear, that is, to have it come out and we're able to get unstuck because we're stating how we feel and how much we care about that person. Or even if it's somebody, we grieve somebody who may have been an SOB, but we have to acknowledge that when that person is gone, there's a hole there. Mm-hmm. And then we may have to put that on paper. You were a terrible husband, but I still love you. And in that way, we begin to make very visible the loss that we're having and saying that's the way it is. With the loss of sight, it's kind of like, okay, and this is where the meaning that I was mentioning, finding meaning, that's where it's extremely important. Getting involved with organizations that are made up of people who are blind and understand. That was one of the reasons I had to come to the training center here to understand. I was trying to deal with my loss of sight, which was, getting more and more, trying to do it. And I'm a therapist. I should know how to do it, right? I had to come to the center to be with other blind people, to immerse myself in with other people. You go into an organization of blind people and immerse yourself in with other people and realize and develop hope because you see other people adjusting to the loss of vision and creating lives for themselves and kind of being cheerleaders for each other. That's extremely important. And then you come to the realization, I'm more than just my blindness. And now that I know that I'm blind and I accept it, now what do I do? And then begin to fulfill and find out that the messages you were giving yourself that you couldn't do has to be replaced by what you can do. And even the things that you thought you couldn't do, you still find that you can do. My sister was an artist. She was able to handle her artistic ability without sight, from memory, by tactile. She found other ways to do it, and she did some fabulous artwork. But of course, she had a stroke later, and then she couldn't do that. And then that was the beginning of the slide down and trying to reconcile who she was and also the meaning that David Kessler talks about. How do I find meaning? Mm-hmm. But that's what we have to do. And when we come to finding meaning with the loss and feel valued, people who retire, well, I don't go to the office anymore. What do I do now? That's a loss for them. And particularly if they've been doing a job as a blind person and then their meaning is coming from their work, they have to be able to find meaning, and that's where volunteerism can help. That's where making sure you don't isolate, but you're with other people, doing things, not drinking and so forth. That's how we deal and come to a resolution once we feel that we're still valued and okay despite whatever the loss was.
Well, and when a person is seeking a counselor to help them with grief, I wanted to be sure we touched on advocating for yourself, having a counselor that's understanding, and looking at the difference between grief and, clinical type of depression. So they're not saying, "Oh, you're depressed, here's a pill."
Right.
And being able to advocate for yourself, because you might be seeking assistance for grief because you're losing vision, but you also might happen to be a person who has vision loss and you're seeking help for grief from the loss of a spouse or, some other reason, and not just having a counselor presume that, oh, well, you're sad because you've lost
You're
vision.
blind. Yeah, exactly. The attribution. And that's what you have to watch out for. A well-meaning therapist may go into attribution, and it doesn't hurt. If the person is smart enough to bring it up and said, is blindness a factor? Well, yeah, blindness is partially a factor in that I've lost this person that was my companion and I could do things with. But the blindness is not the problem. It's the problem, I feel, is the loss of my partner or the loss of my dog. The world is different. How do I cope with the fact that the world is now different because that person or that dog is no longer with me?
Right. And the person or the dog, if it's a guide dog, but the person also may have been providing assistance. Oh, yes, those clothes match, or they're driving you places, or, some small things day to day.
Right. And then you have to then be able to advocate for yourself rather than going to a counselor. If that's the issue, then the hardest thing for both men and women, but particularly men and women, is to ask for help. Because then that assumes we're helpless. And when we're blind, we're not helpless. But we need assistance. And that's where the advocacy becomes so important. And one of the things someone taught me when I was trying to pass and not let anybody know that I was blind and tripping over fire hydrants or going into a crowded restaurant and bumping into chairs, tables, and people, I wouldn't ask for help. And my friend said, Bill, how good you feel when you help someone. How dare you deny me the opportunity to get that same good feeling helping you? And that's where you're advocating for yourself and also helping another person have good feeling, helping you. What you have to be careful is how much, whether somebody is taking over and disrespecting you. Your advocacy has to be to say, no, what you're doing is disrespecting me, or you're doing far more than I need you to do. This is what I need you to do, and that would be helpful for me. That's the kind of advocacy for yourself that you have to put aside the shame. See, we get that shame from feeling like we need somebody to help us, but that's our blindness is teaching us that we're not so omnipotent, that we are going to need help, and that is okay. And we have to pay attention when the person is doing too much, is taking over, taking control. Because some people like that, and we have to set boundaries on them and say, okay, I want you to help me with this, but I need you to do it in this way that doesn't demean me, that doesn't control me. I need you to take care of yourself and not do everything for me and forget about yourself. That's the codependent, the caretaker. I want you to take care of yourself, but I also need you to do X, Y, Z. How can that be done? How can both of us work on that?
Right. Well, and ultimately, it seems like working through the grief process, a person can come out of that process more resilient than they were before.
Yes, exactly. Sometimes we have to have grief in order to learn what it is that we can do. And if we come from, again, finding meaning, finding hope, as we go through the grief, realize, oh, I'm able to do X, Y, Z. I feel good about myself. I'm sorry that person is gone, and anniversaries I'll remember. But that doesn't mean my world stops.
Well, Bill, this is our final podcast for the mental health topic for this month. What are some final thoughts that you may have that you'd like to share as we wrap up our month of looking at aspects of mental health?
Well, number one, I have to say that I'm very appreciative of you and AIN, because this is a subject, particularly in blindness, that we're not talking about. we don't talk that much about mental as much as we should because of the shame and the stigma around it. And I've told some friends that are in the profession about what you were doing by having me on, and they were so excited because they said nobody talks about it. And they're a counselor. Nobody talks about blindness or disability. We just act as if everybody's sighted and has no problem other than the mental health thing that we're working on. So by opening the door for us to take a look at it is so important, and for us to be able to, instead of being ashamed of having grief or having a disability, to be able to be upfront about it, not hostile. Sometimes we come across as hostile. How dare you do this, or how dare you? We say, no, I can't see when you say over there. And I know one of my character flaws is I live in a condo. I know I get on the elevator and somebody says, "Hi, Bill." I don't know who it is, but boy, I still have to teach myself to ask, "Hi, who is this that I'm talking to?" Because I still have that little piece of me that even after all these years, and I talk to other people, and I have to say to myself, "Bill, are you going to take your own advice and do what you need, and help yourself?" I hope that this has been helpful for people, and it's a taste that people will tune in to the podcast, and we'll have a lot of speakers. You don't have to listen to me forever. A lot of speakers talking about different aspects of the subject of mental health and blindness that will be helpful. But most importantly, I'd like to have feedback, people letting us know what they want to hear.
Well, that's great, Bill. So that program will be launching next week. It's called Blindsight. And as Bill mentioned, he will be hosting, but he will be talking to many other people within the mental health community and space about the various aspects of that broad topic. So we're really looking forward to that. I hope you'll tune in. If you found this last month of podcast helpful, you'll definitely want to tune in to Blindsight, and that will be coming out for you every week. And also next week, we'll be starting a new month and a new topic of the month. And as we finished this month talking a bit about advocating for yourself, speaking with the counselor, and in this mental health area, next month, our entire focus will be self-advocacy and the different situations where you might need to advocate for yourself. How do you learn to advocate for yourself? What are the laws? What are your rights so that you feel confident to advocate for yourself? So there is much more that you'll want to tune in for next month as we begin our topic of the month of self-advocacy. So thank you so much, Bill, for joining us for this month, and we look forward to hearing from you on Blindsight. And thank you to everyone who's been tuning in, and to all the folks at Audio Information Network who help put the information and the podcasts and the volunteer read information, all the volunteers who are helping to make Topic of the Month a success.